Let's check the oil level in my Porsche 911. I've been using this method ever since I've been doing my own maintenance, and now I'm building engines for people from all over the country. So I want to show you the correct way to do it and how to prepare your car before you even think about checking the dipstick or looking at the level gauge on the dashboard. If it's not done correctly, you could end up overfilling it, causing a lot of smoke, or even worse, you might even do some engine damage. So why is it so hard? I believe that most of the confusion stems from the fact that a lot of owners don't realise that these engines have a dry sump oiling system, and that they are a little bit different from regular cars where we're used to just pulling the dipstick out and checking the level of oil. So before checking the oil, the three things that you have to do. 1, the car must be on level ground. 2, the engine has to be running. And 3, and this is the most important of all of them, the oil has to be hot and up to operating temperature so that the external thermostat is open. Now, I've already taken my car for a long drive to get the engine nice and hot and to get the oil nice and hot so that the thermostat's open. Let's go inside and see what the gauges say. Okay, so there's the oil pressure gauge, there's the oil temperature gauge, and that's the oil level. Sorry, my steering wheel's right in the way, so it makes it a little bit hard to see, but if I just turn that on. But you can see on here that my needle is well above the lower white mark, so that's like what I call 8 o'clock. And over here you can see my oil level on the gauge. So the gauge is actually telling me, can you see that there? The gauge is actually telling me I've got just a fraction over a half. And again, I'm happy with that. The gauge is really an indication only, and there's about 1 litre between the bottom, which is the bottom of the dipstick, and the top, which is full on the dipstick. So another really good test you can do if you're not sure that the oil's hot enough is to reach underneath the car and touch the oil lines themselves. In the second part of this video, I'll show you where they run and where they go. But it's easy to reach inside the wheel arch here, just behind the tyre, and you can touch the lines here, and if they're really, really hot, that's a fairly good sign that your thermostat's likely to be open. Okay, so hopefully you can still hear me over the sound of the engine. But yeah, no, my engine oil's nice and hot. Car's on level ground, the engine's obviously running. Now and only now can you actually check your dipstick. So I always pull it out, give it a wipe, put it back in, pull it out again. And you can see on my dipstick that it's roughly, I'm hoping you can see that, but it's roughly halfway on the stick. So that's saying that my oil tank is half full. Or rather, my oil system is half full. I like to call it an oil system. Thanks for watching. That's pretty much it. It's not that hard. It's pretty easy to do. The most important thing is that you have to remember to get the oil really, really, really hot. You can't just drive the car for 10 minutes and because you feel that the engine's hot, then the oil must be hot. No, the oil has to be up to full operating temperature so that the external thermostat's open. Don't forget that little test about putting your hands underneath the side of the car there just to feel the lines that are nice and hot. If they're only warm, it means the thermostat's only just cracked open, so it's probably still needing another 5 or 10 minutes of running until the oil's really, really, really hot. If you found any of this information useful, please do me a favour. Like the video, just click the button, doesn't cost you anything, doesn't hurt you, but it will help the YouTube algorithm to suggest it out to more people that are interested in old 911s. Okay, so I've got the car jacked up, I've got both wheels off, and I just wanted to go through the oil system in the Aircooled 911, just for people that have a little bit more of an interest in how it flows and why it's important to have it up to temperature before you check your oil level. So we all know this is where you put your oil in. We know that we check our oil in the dipstick here. That's our oil filter in the side, just there. So our oil tank is in the right-hand rear quarter, as previously mentioned. So there's the tank there, and that's the oil level sender just in the side there. So that's one of the main components. You can see these oil lines here in the guard. So the flow of oil, it actually goes from the tank through this large S-hose here, the big rubber one, and goes through a pipe in the bottom of the oil cooler there. And that flows, that doesn't go through the cooler, it just goes through a pipe that's below the cooler. That goes straight to the engine, straight to the oil pump, and the pump obviously sends it to wherever it needs to go, which is, you know, the main bearings, rod bearings, chain tensioners, etc. And if you like, I do have an engine case sitting on the stand, and I can actually go through and show you a little bit more if you want to know what happens inside the engine about oil flow. So that's where it feeds to the engine, and once it's gone through the engine and it's drained back to the bottom of the sump, so we'll get underneath the car here. So once it gets through to the bottom of the engine case, it then gets scavenged by the pump, and it pumps the oil back around to the oil tank. So this is my return line here, and as you can see, I've got a very mild weep here, but that's my return line, and it runs through this line here, up through there, and through to the thermostat. Now this air intake's in the way, but the thermostat is mounted just there, and what I might do here is I might just insert a picture of a thermostat so you know what it looks like. Now, while the oil is sort of cold, it actually doesn't go anywhere. It just goes straight back. It hits the thermostat's closed, so it goes straight back through this other line into the bottom of the tank here, gets forced up through the oil filter and then drops back to the tank. So it just runs that, so it does that circuit. It goes through the rubber hose, through to the engine, comes back out of the engine, up through this hose to the thermostat and then back. So it just runs that loop while the engine oil is below operating temperature. It just keeps running in that little loop there, and this is why you can't really check your oil level, because it's not taking into account the rest of the oil that's in the rest of the system, which is up at the front half of the car. So let's just fast forward and pretend that we've had the engine running, we've driven it lightly for a few minutes, we've got the engine oil up to temperature, which is about, I don't know, 80 odd degrees Celsius, I think. You'll find then that the thermostat will open, and now you can see there's two lines at the bottom of the thermostat. So what these lines run underneath the car, and I'll see if I can get the camera up there. All right, so you can see these lines run down the side of the car. I've got some little arrows there just to show the flow of oil. So it comes up this line here, comes around and goes into the oil cooler. Now on my car, I have a Carrera style oil cooler, so it's a finned oil cooler. But on the early SCs, you'll have either the trombone, and I'll put a picture of a trombone cooler there so you know what to look for, or you might have the slightly later model, I think it's a 28 row brass tube cooler. So the brass tube cooler is a little bit better than the trombone, of course. So what happens is the oil goes into the cooler, the air blows through it, it sort of wicks away some of the heat from the oil. The colder oil, or the cooler oil, comes back, flows down the other side, and it runs back down the side of the car and through to one of the other lines, and then it comes back through to the oil tank. So what the thermostat does, think of it as like a temperature valve. So once it hits the correct temperature, my God, that crow is so noisy. Well, it turns out I can't make the crows be quiet. I've asked nicely and they won't do it. So yeah, so the thermostat's closed when the oil is cold, and when the oil gets hot, the thermostat opens, and now the oil is flowing from the front of the car all the way down. So we have oil circulating through the entire system when the oil is at full temperature. And that's the only time when you can actually check your oil level and be confident of getting an accurate reading of the level of oil in the entire oil system.